All right, everybody. Thank you for joining another video. In this video, we're going to be talking about supportive living versus elderly personal home care, which is the strongest business model. So for entrepreneurs and startup providers considering entering the home care support services industry, it is crucial to understand the business model differences. In the United States, Medicaid, HCBS waivers fund both types of services for individuals who obviously qualify. The market dynamics and sustainability of serving individuals with developmental disabilities versus serving the elderly population differ significantly. Okay. So, overview of supported living services and elderly home care. So, supported living services serving developmental disabilities, right? So, supported living refers to in home support services for individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities. These services are typically funded through state Medicaid home and community based service waivers on a fee for service basis through the state. Supported living helps adults, oftentimes with developmental disabilities, live in their own homes or apartments with individualized support, okay? So, assistance with daily living skills, budgeting, community integration, etc. Services are always person-centered and can range from, simply a few hours a week to round-the-clock care, depending on the individual's needs. Providers must usually meet state licensing or certification requirements to deliver these waiver-funded IDD services, whereas personal home care services for the elderly, right? Personal care for seniors involves assisting older adults with activities of daily living such as bathing, dressing, meal preparation, and medication reminders in the individual's home. These services might be paid for privately by long-term care insurance or through state and Medicaid aging programs for low-income seniors like 1915C aged and disabled waivers. Unlike IDD waivers, many state elderly care programs are increasingly administered via managed care organizations or have stricter caps on hours and budgets. Home care for seniors is often provided in short shifts. For example, a caregiver visits for a couple of hours and is commonly needed in the later years of life or during recovery periods. Providers in this space include home care agencies, both small and independent and franchises, serving a highly competitive market. Okay. Why compare these models? Okay, why am I even making this video? So, for entrepreneurs and providers considering entering the home care support services industry, it's crucial to understand the business model differences. In the United States, Medicaid HCBS waivers fund both types of services for those who qualify, but the market dynamics and sustainability of serving adults with developmental disabilities versus the elderly population differ significantly. As we're going to get into it, in the next slides, we're going to explore the key factors such as longevity of client relationships, intensity of care, staffing realities, reimbursement rates, and policy structures to explain why focusing on supported living for people with developmental disabilities can offer a stronger, more sustainable business model than focusing on personal home care for seniors. Okay. No, this training focuses on nationwide U.S. trends in fee-for-service state-funded waivers. While individual state programs vary, we do cite general data and examples to illustrate the differences. If you want to look at state-specific data, then go ahead and go to the playlist where I show you every single state, okay? We're going to be covering all 50 states of the HCBS waivers, things like group homes, supported living, community-based day programs, supported employment, so on and so forth, okay? So first and foremost, talking about longevity of client relationships. So one of the most striking differences between the two models is how long clients typically remain in service. So for adults, for example, with developmental disabilities, decades of service. Individuals with developmental disabilities often begin receiving support in early childhood or early adulthood and continue throughout their lifespan. Most people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have lifelong support needs and with growing life expectancies into their 60s or 70s in many cases. They may receive services for several decades, whereas in supported living arrangements, it's very common to serve the same clients for years or even decades, as the goal is to enable a stable, long-term living situation in the community. The longevity provides a reliable revenue stream per client and reduces the churn of constantly replacing clientele. In fact, state developmental disability systems are effectively long-term care systems from day one. A young adult who starts services at 22 may remain in the program for 30, 40, 50 plus years. Whereas elderly home care clients, shorter durations in nature. By contrast, seniors usually begin home care at a later stage of life, oftentimes in their 70s or 80s, and for more time-limited needs. Many enter home care due to age-related fragility or following a hospital discharge, and unfortunately, their need for care is often short-term, a few months to a few years rather than open-ended. Research, however, shows that among older adults who use paid home care, the average duration of care is only about 1.8 years. Similarly, if a senior eventually transitions to a nursing home or passes away, that marks the end of the home care engagement. In practical business terms, this means an elderly-focused home care agency must continually be finding new clients to replace those who leave after a year or two, a cycle that can strain marketing and intake resources. So, why does longevity matter? The long-term nature of DD services makes for a more predictable and stable model. Providers can count on steady, ongoing service hours for each client over many, 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 many years. In economic terms, the lifetime value of an individual with developmental disabilities is significantly higher. For example, a person with a developmental disability might receive services from age 25 until the end of their life, potentially 30 plus years of continuous care needs. However, in contrast, a typical elderly home care client might generate revenue for 2 years on average. Longer relationships not only yield more total revenue per client, but also foster deeper trust and consistency in care, which can improve outcomes and client satisfaction, feeding back into an agency's reputation and referrals. Okay. So getting into the intensity and consistency of care needs. Another key difference, okay, is the intensity hours of care each client typically uses and how consistent the scheduling is. So for supported living for the developmentally disabled, higher hours in nature, predictable schedules. Supported living services often involve a greater number of care hours per week for each client, especially for those with moderate to severe disabilities. It is not uncommon for individuals in supported living to have daily support or even 24/7, support staffing in some cases. For example, a supported living agency might provide one-on-one support for 40 plus hours per week, or even have full 24/7 coverage if needed. Even when 24-hour care is not required, many DD clients have regular morning until evening support routines, or a mix of day programs and in-home support in evenings and nights. The key point is that care hours for DD clients tend to be much more intensive and ongoing, a consistent schedule month over month. This consistency, for example, caregiver shifts every day from 3 to 11 p.m. with a client helps providers with efficient scheduling and maximizes billable hours. It also means caregivers can work longer shifts with one client, building a rapport and a routine. Whereas elderly home care, in nature, fewer hours, fragmented visits. Many seniors receiving home care do not require round-the-clock assistance. They often need just a few hours of help with specific tasks. And as a result, home care cases for older adults frequently involve part-time schedules. For example, a caregiver might visit for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, or perhaps 3 days a week for 4 hours each. In fact, agencies cite that many clients don't need full-time care, just help a few hours a day or a few times a week at that. These short shifts create a fragmented service schedule, both for the client and the agency. A single caregiver may have to cover multiple clients in one day to get enough hours, traveling between very short visits. From the business perspective, the agency's billable hours per client are extremely low, maybe between 10 to 20 hours a week on average, and those hours can especially fluctuate if a client's condition changes or if family members fill in some days, okay? So to illustrate this contrast, a simple table, we have adults with developmental disabilities at 40 hours a week, support staff daily from 2 to 10 p.m., plus on-call overnight consistent each week. Whereas elderly home care, 12 hours, 3 visits times 4 hours, caregiver visits Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 4 hours each in the morning, no coverage on other days, okay? So typical weekly service intensity for a high-need DD client versus a moderate-need elderly client. Supported living often authorizes far more hours per week, leading to higher service intensity performance. Guys, Try hiring a staff who's only going to want to work, 12 hours a week. It's going to be very difficult for you versus being able to hire somebody who, you can staff for 40 hours a week. Okay. So why intensity and consistency matter to this point? So higher stable hours per client make the business overall more scalable and efficient. With a DD services model, an agency might serve fewer clients overall, but provide many hours to each, which can simplify coordination. Okay, each caregiver covers longer shifts and boosts revenue per client. The predictability of a weekly routine means staff utilization is high. Caregivers can be full time on a case, reducing idle time. Whereas, by contrast, an elderly home care agency must juggle many clients each with a small number of hours. Okay, schedules can be irregular. For example, a client cancels because a family member is visiting, etc., which leads to unfilled gaps in caregiver scheduled. Fragmented hours are not only less efficient, they also contribute to caregiver dissatisfaction. In short, supported living services allows for more continuous care and makes it easier to fill a caregiver's 40-hour work week with billable hours, enhancing the provider's productivity and revenue consistency. Okay? Staffing challenges and workforce considerations. Hiring and retaining caregivers is a challenge across the care industry, but there are differences in how each model fares. Senior home care, so fragmented shifts and shortage woes. So home care agencies serving seniors often struggle with staffing because of the nature of the work. Many short shifts, traveling between clients, and often lower pay. Caregivers frequently find that driving across town for a 2-hour shift with no consistent schedule simply doesn't work for them. Okay, in practice, agencies report high no-show rates and turnover for these short visits. The industry faces a well-documented caregiver shortage, especially for elder care. Approximately 800,000 older Americans are on waiting lists for subsidized home care, largely due to a lack of available workers. Moreover, turnover rates are alarming. The median caregiver turnover in home care was 64% in 2021. This means that more than half of an agency's caregiving staff might leave within 1 year, a cycle that is extremely expensive in hiring and training costs that can jeopardize care continuity. The reasons include obviously low wages, burnout, and the scheduling challenges described above. Home care aides often earn near minimum wage, and many live near poverty themselves. As demand for senior care skyrockets with the aging population, agencies find it increasingly hard to recruit and retain enough caregivers willing to work under these conditions. Whereas supported living for the developmentally disabled population, specialized workforce with longer shifts. Okay, providers in the DD sector also face workforce shortages. In 2019, the average national turnover rate for DSPs, direct support professionals, was 43%, which is high, though notably lower than the turnover in elderly home care. While low pay and demanding work are issues here too, the nature of supported living can be more appealing to workers in some ways, right? Caregivers, direct support professionals in supported living often get longer shifts with the same client, allowing them to work, say, 8 hours at a stretch in one location rather than 4 2-hour shifts in different homes. This alone can reduce burnout from commuting and give a sense of stable routine. It also helps build meaningful relationships. Many caregivers find it rewarding to support the same individual long term, seeing their progress and forming a bond versus the rotating door of short term home care cases. Another factor is training. Working with people with developmental disabilities might require specialized training, such as behavioral support, communication methods, etc. But that training can increase job satisfaction and skill level, potentially leading to lower turnover in generalized elder care. So, comparison of staffing factors, right? Again, scheduling. Supported living offers more full-time positions or consistent part-time schedules for staff. For example, a fixed daily shift with one client, whereas senior home care often asks caregivers to be available on call for multiple short assignments, a less predictable situation. Worker availability. The pool of workers for both sectors intersects, okay? Many caregivers are willing to work with either population, but some prefer one over the other. Currently, with public awareness and funding, there are significant shortages in both fields. However, because elder care demand is larger, the elder care gap is especially pronounced. States like New York, for example, have about 30 caregivers per 1,000 seniors. One of the best ratios, whereas some states have under 10 per 1,000, indicating severe shortages. Okay. Turnover and retention. High turnover is costly. If an agency can improve retention by offering better schedules or slightly higher pay, that agency gains a competitive edge. The DD model's more predictable hours and opportunity for caregivers to feel part of the client's life may improve retention relative to the erratic schedules in senior home care. This is not to romanticize developmentally disabled care, right, as it can be challenging work in nature. The clients that we serve may have behavioral issues, etc. But from a management perspective, fewer longer shifts are easier to fill than many tiny shifts, okay? Agencies now have developed strategies to tackle short shift staffing in home care, but these add cost and complexity. And supported living, each measures are less often needed because shifts are naturally longer, okay? For the bottom line, staffing a home care business for seniors can be an uphill battle with the current labor market. The combination of declining availability of caregivers and the unattractive nature of fragmented hours makes it tough to scale an elderly-focused agency without running into staffing bottlenecks. However, in contrast, while DD service providers also face workforce issues, the structure of supported living, more hours per caregiver, deeper relationships can mitigate some of the challenges. Over time, agencies that build a reputation for quality in DD services might also find a more loyal workforce. Some caregivers are especially passionate about helping people with disabilities and will stick with an employer that shares that mission. So the next thing I want to talk about is the reimbursement rates. Okay, let me take a sip of water. So financial sustainability hinges on what the payer reimburses for each hour or unit of service. Here we see a significant advantage for supported living services. So higher rates for DD services. Medicaid waivers for individuals with developmental disabilities generally reimburse services at a much higher rate than basic personal care for seniors. This is because supporting an individual with intellectual and developmental disabilities often involves a broader scope of services, including skill building, behavioral support, etc., and might require more training or oversight. A national analysis found that the median payment rate for Medicaid personal care services is about $19 an hour. Personal care, often the category under which senior home care falls, tends to be one of the lower reimbursed service types. By contrast, services for people with intellectual and or developmental disabilities can bill at higher rates or in bundled units. For example, some states use a daily rate for supported living or residential habilitation. In one state's waiver, supported living for high-need DD clients was reimbursed at roughly $40 an hour. A study of intellectually and developmentally disabled waivers found that the average spending per participant was almost $60,000 a year for adult waivers. In other words, Medicaid was willing to invest nearly $60,000 annually to support an individual in the community, whereas elderly, disabled waivers, on the other hand, have much tighter, stricter budgets. Many states cap the annual cost per senior to be below the cost of nursing home care. For instance, Alabama's elderly and disabled waiver historically had an individual cost cap of $25,000 a year, where their DD waiver living at home raised its cap to $50,000 a year back in 2019, okay? Well, the rates 6 years later are even higher, and the caps are even higher. Supported living services sometimes include, in addition, ancillary supports like skills training or transportation built into the rate, recognizing the comprehensive needs of clients with developmental disabilities. These higher reimbursement levels reflect the higher needs and also ensure providers can pay specialized staff, whereas lower rates for elderly home care. So in the senior home care market, many clients pay privately, but even private pay residents are often limited by what local markets can bear and are often not much higher than Medicaid rates. Medicaid aging waivers or state planned personal care programs typically pay between $18 to $22 an hour to agencies for in-home care, depending on the state, of course. In some states, the rates have not kept up with rising minimum wages, squeezing provider margins and caregiver wages. Because of managed care in many states, home care agencies might have to negotiate rates with insurance plans, which further keeps rates down. Additionally, seniors might use fewer hours as noted, so even if the hourly rate was similar, the total revenue per client is always going to be lower. So to visualize the financial gap, consider an annual comparison. A supported living client authorized 40 hours a week at $40 an hour okay, would generate over $78,000 per year in revenue, whereas a senior personal care client using 15 hours a week at $19 an hour would only generate $14,820 per year. Even if these numbers vary by state, it's clear that the DD client can represent a substantially larger revenue opportunity than an elderly client due to both higher hourly rates and higher hours authorized. Furthermore, DD providers can often bill for additional services like community habilitation, supported employment, etc., and we will get more into service stacking in another video as part of a person's plan, adding to the revenue. Elderly home care providers usually are limited to personal care and perhaps light homemaker tasks, a much narrower scope. So, policy note, okay. Funding stability. So, another consideration is that state developmental disability services are typically funded through dedicated waiver slots in budgets that legislature prioritizes for the long term. There is a federal state partnership, okay? Medicaid covers a portion, usually 50 to 75%, depending on the state of waiver costs, and the state covers the rest. States are often keen to keep individuals with developmental disabilities out of costly institutions like intermediate care facilities or state developmental centers, so they maintain relatively robust funding in the community. On the aging side, while states also want to maintain relatively robust on the aging side, while states also want to reduce nursing home use, the funding streams for home care can be much more precarious. Some states have waiting lists for aging waivers, and if budgets are tight, those programs might not expand. Also, as mentioned, many aging programs have moved to managed care. Over half of states delivered Medicaid HCBS for seniors and adults with physical disabilities via managed care plans, which means providers are paid by insurance companies that may impose authorization limits, prefer lower cost aids, etc. In contrast, only a few states, 6 out of 47 with intellectually and developmentally disabled waivers, have moved their services to managed care. The vast majority of DD providers still bill the state directly on a fee-for-service schedule, which can be extremely much more straightforward and reliable. Okay? Long-term financial outlook. So with an aging population, one might assume that senior care is quote unquote where the money is due to sheer volume of need. However, from a business standpoint, the rate per unit and total spending per client are far more favorable in the developmentally disabled sector. The margins in senior home care can be extremely thin. Agencies often struggle to pay caregivers more than minimum wage plus a small benefits package and still break even. In supported living, high reimbursement can allow for slightly better wages or more supervisory support, which can in turn reduce turnover and improve quality, a virtuous cycle. Additionally, because DD clients are usually state funded, providers are paid by a consistent Medicaid source, whereas in private pay elderly home care, clients can very well run out of money or terminate services abruptly if costs pile up for the families. The state funded DD model ensures that as long as you maintain compliance and quality, you will get paid for authorized services month after month, decade over decade. State waiver policy considerations. So when comparing these models, it's useful to touch on how different states' policies shape the landscape. So eligibility and demand. So all 50 states have some form of IDD waiver that provides supported living or related services. These waivers often have waiting lists because demand exceeds funded slots in many places. Once a client receives a waiver slot, they are typically entitled to ongoing services as long as they remain eligible. This can lock in long-term clientele for providers. Aging waivers also exist in most states called aged and disabled waivers, but not everyone who needs help can get one. Indeed, tens of thousands of older adults are on waitlists nationwide. Some seniors instead pay out of pocket for home care, which can be extremely expensive and cause them to discontinue services if finances dwindle, or as I should say, when finances dwindle. So for a provider, the DD sector offers a more stable pipeline of clients coming through referrals from state agencies. Once you are a qualified provider and maybe on referral lists, okay, in the senior market, agencies must invest in marketing and sales to attract private clients or contracts. Regulatory complexity, okay. So operating in the DD waiver system means complying with Medicaid rules, which can be paperwork heavy. Providers need to manage service plans, documentation, audits, etc. However, this is a known upfront cost of doing business in that arena. And once systems are in place, it is manageable. Elderly home care agencies have relatively lighter licensing in some states, often just a general home care license. But if they take Medicaid clients, they also face significant regulations and the added complexity of dealing with multiple payers, various insurance plans, families, etc. Many successful DD providers become experts in one system. They work with one state's Department of Developmental Disabilities or similar agency, whereas a private pay senior care agency might juggle many client situations and possibly different insurance authorizations. Focusing on a single payer model being a state waiver simplifies billing and collection, which is usually reliable through Medicaid. Managed care versus fee for service. So, as noted, states often keep DD services carved out of managed care, meaning providers get direct fee for service reimbursement set by the state fee schedule. Rates may even be adjusted periodically for cost of living or due to advocacy. In senior care, if a managed care organization is in the mix, providers might face pressures to cut costs or accept lower rates, and payments might be slower, subject to more denial of claims. Fee-for-service waivers offer more transparency. You know the rate that Medicaid pays for each service unit and can build your business model accordingly. And if you want the Medicaid fee-for-service rates, go ahead and just drop a comment on the YouTube video. I'll be happy to send it to you, or you can book a call with our team. More into that a little bit later. So in summary, state policies currently favor a relatively robust, if sometimes bureaucratic, support system for individuals with developmental IDD services, whereas home care for older adults is more patchwork and constrained. This policy environment adds to the sustainability of the DD service model. So let's talk about long-term financial viability and growth. So considering all of the above factors, supported living for individuals with developmental disabilities tends to be a more sustainable and potentially more profitable focus for a service provider than personal home care services for seniors. Here are the key takeaways wrapped up in a business context. Client retention and lifetime value. So DD clients offer long-term engagement. Decades-long service relationships means that lower client turnover and steady revenue. Elderly clients, while numerous, have a high attrition rate due to health decline and short average service duration, requiring constant intake of new clients to maintain revenue. High utilization of service hours. So a supported living agency can achieve high utilization, many hours billed per client per week, and fill caregiver schedules efficiently, whereas an elder care agency deals with underutilization, meaning fewer hours per clients, gaps between shifts. Simply put, more hours equals more billables and less idle time, a clear and obvious advantage for the developmentally disabled care model. Workforce stability. While caregiver shortages affect all, the DD model's longer shifts and potentially stronger bonds can improve staffing stability. The senior home care model suffers from staffing chaos or short shifts, contributing to extremely high turnover, which is 64% in senior home care. High turnover drains resources and can jeopardize quality, a risk for business reputation. A more stable workforce in the DD sector can improve service quality and reduce recruitment costs over time. Reimbursement and margins. So money talks. Higher reimbursement rates and annual budgets in DD services means better margins. Providers can invest in training, supervision, and slightly higher wages, which further strengthens the business. In the senior market, thin margins make it hard to invest in growth or quality improvement. The difference is often described as specialty healthcare versus commodity service. DD supports are a specialty funded accordingly, whereas basic senior care is treated more like a commodity with lower pay. Next, market competition. So the DD service sector has higher barriers to entry. Providers must navigate Medicaid contracting, meet training standards, etc., which ultimately limits competition to some degree. If you establish a reputable agency in this space, you may get referrals funneling to you with relatively fewer direct competitors in your region. The senior home care industry, conversely, is flooded with agencies, many requiring only a simple license to start, and even informal providers. Competing for private pay clients can be costly, such as advertising, partnerships with hospitals, etc., and pushes prices down to the bottom. Focusing on a niche like IDD services can be a savvy way to differentiate and secure a stable client base. Next, future trends. Both populations, people with developmental disabilities and elderly adults, are growing in absolute numbers. However, consider that many individuals with intellectual disabilities are now outliving their parents, and states are urgently looking for providers to serve them in community settings as alternative to institutions or even group homes. There is strong legislative and public support funding for these services. For example, waiting list initiatives, waiver expansions, because they are seen as essential and morally important. Guys, if you read Trump's big, beautiful bill, he cuts Medicaid waivers across the board. But in Section E, the final section of the Medicaid chapter, there is an HCBS expansion for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That is the only Medicaid service that they're actually expanding. Keep that in mind, okay? So because they're seen as essentially and morally important. Okay. In contrast, funding for senior home care, while certainly needed, is straining under the weight of demand, and it's unclear if public programs will keep pace. Okay. From a business view, aligning with the DD sector could mean riding a wave of policy support and potentially new funding, such as enhanced waiver programs, which get increased every 6 months nationwide, higher rates to address the DSP workforce crisis, etc., whereas elder care might remain cost constrained. So in conclusion, building your business in the DD services market. For all reasons discussed, longevity of services, intensity of care, staffing patterns, reimbursement rates, and supportive policy frameworks, supported living services for individuals with developmental disabilities present a compelling, sustainable business model for service providers. An agency that specializes in the DD population can cultivate long-term client relationships, achieve more consistent utilization of staff, and leverage higher funding levels to deliver quality care. Over time, these factors contribute to more stable revenue and the ability to grow the business, for example, expanding to serve additional clients as state waivers grow or offering new specialized programs under the waiver. By contrast, a business centered on personal home care for the elderly may face quicker client turnover, difficulty filling many small shifts, lower margins, and intense competition, all of which make it harder to sustain and scale up without compromising on quality or burning out your workforce. Key takeaways for potential providers: predictable long-term demand, revenue per client's higher, operational efficiency, okay, workforce advantages, and stronger reimbursement environment, okay? So in deciding your startup's focus, consider these differences carefully. Many successful agencies have found their niche in serving individuals with developmental disabilities under state waivers, including myself, growing steadily by meeting an essential long-term need. By focusing on supported living services for the developmentally disabled population, you position your organization in a market with enduring demand, higher revenue potential per client, in alignment with public funding priorities, all of which form the foundation of a stronger and more sustainable business model that the fragmented short-term world of personal home care service for seniors. Guys, with all that said, thank you for watching this video, okay? I break down all the different types of VD services and care in another video that you can watch. You can also go to my playlist where you can look at all the different state-specific HCBS waiver services that you can provide, where I will be breaking them down in detail, how to get licensed. If you want to work with assisted living facility launch to get your supported living services agency opened up, your community-based day program agency opened up, your DD group home, agency up. We also license personal home care services. We also license, residential assisted living for the elderly. That's all fine and well. However, this is my opinion based on facts, okay, of what I think you should do as a startup provider and thinking about which population to serve. So, guys, in the description, in the link in my bio, you guys can book a call with my team so that you can see if working with us and using us to help you get licensed is the right decision for you and your startup. As always, thank you again, subscribe, and I will see you in the next